The night was quiet in the way that only happens when you're far from home and finally relaxed. I was sitting on the edge of a motel bed, shoes kicked off, TV on low volume, the kind of forgettable late-night show that plays more for background noise than entertainment. I had spent the entire day driving, checking into a job site, eating a late dinner alone. Nothing about the moment stood out. Nothing felt urgent. My phone was face down on the nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. When it started vibrating, I almost ignored it. At first, I thought it was an alarm I'd forgotten to silence. Then it buzzed again, and again. Not a text, not a notification, a call. That alone was strange. It was past midnight, and nobody who knows me calls at that hour unless something is wrong. I flipped the phone over and frowned at the screen. Unknown number, no name, no location I recognized. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Spam calls happen at all hours now, but something about the persistence made me hesitate. Whoever it was, they weren't giving up. I answered, "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a calm, professional voice. "Good evening, sir. This is the United States Coast Guard. Am I speaking with the registered owner of the vessel Lucky Escape?" That sentence didn't land all at once. It arrived in pieces. Coast Guard, registered owner, Lucky Escape, my boat. I sat up straighter. "Yes," I said slowly, "that's me." "Sir," the voice continued, "we're conducting a routine stop on a vessel matching your registration. I need to confirm whether you authorized this boat for nighttime charter use." I actually laughed, just a short breath of disbelief. "No," I said, "I didn't." Another pause. Longer this time. "To be clear," the officer said carefully, "you did not give permission for your vessel to be operated tonight." "No," I repeated, the word sharper now. "I'm not even in the same city. I'm over 200 miles away." Silence. Not dead air, but the kind of silence where you know someone is processing information they didn't expect. I felt a cold sensation creep up my spine. "Why are you asking me this?" I said, "Sir," the officer replied, still controlled but no longer casual. "Can you confirm your current location?" I told him. The motel, the town, the distance. I could hear typing on his end, keys clicking rapidly. Somewhere in the background, there was wind, the faint hum of an engine, muted voices that didn't sound relaxed. "Thank you," he said. "Please stay on the line." That's when it hit me. My boat wasn't just missing. It wasn't tied up incorrectly or borrowed without telling me. It was out on the water, at night, being operated, and the Coast Guard was involved. "Who's on the boat?" I asked. Another pause. "Sir, there appears to be a private gathering taking place on board." "A private gathering?" I stood up, pacing now, phone pressed to my ear. "That's not possible," I said. "No one has access to that boat except me. According to the individuals on board," the officer said, "they claim the vessel is being used for a community event." A community event. The words didn't make sense together. My boat wasn't a rental. It wasn't part of any program. It wasn't community property. It was locked, secured, monitored, or at least it was supposed to be. "Who told them they could do that?" I asked. There was hesitation this time, the kind that told me the answer wasn't simple. "One individual has identified herself as representing a homeowners association," the officer said. "She claims the vessel is approved for use." My stomach dropped. I didn't interrupt. I didn't yell. I just waited because something told me that if I spoke too quickly, I'd miss something important. "Sir," he continued, "she also states that you granted permission verbally." I stopped pacing. "No," I said flatly, "I did not. I've never spoken to her about my boat. I never would." Another stretch of silence. I could almost picture the scene now, even without seeing it. The flashing lights reflecting off the water. People standing too still. Someone realizing a story wasn't holding up. "Thank you for clarifying," the officer said. "Please remain available. We may need additional confirmation." The call ended. Just like that. No dramatic goodbye. No reassurance. Just a click and a dead screen. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my phone like it might start explaining itself. The room felt smaller. The quiet that had seemed peaceful minutes earlier now felt heavy, oppressive. I replayed the call in my head. Every word, every pause. My boat was out there, my boat was being used, and someone had confidently told federal authorities that I'd approved it. I knew exactly who that someone was. I grabbed my keys, then stopped. There was nowhere to go. I was hours away. Whatever was happening was already happening without me. For the first time, that lack of control scared me more than the theft itself. I sat back down and opened the Marina app on my phone, the one I checked more out of habit than necessity. The slip showed as occupied, just like always. No alerts, no warnings. If I hadn't installed my own systems, I would have had no idea anything was wrong. That thought lingered. 5 minutes passed. 10. My phone stayed silent. Each second stretched longer than the last. My mind filled the gaps with questions I didn't yet have answers to. How did they get access? Who else was involved? How long had this been planned? Then the phone rang again. Same number. "Sir," the officer said when I answered, "we need you to confirm one more thing. Are there any circumstances under which your homeowners association would have legal authority over your vessel or—" "Doc." "No," I said immediately. "None. It's privately owned, deeded, documented." "Understood," he replied. "The individual on board is unable to produce written authorization." I closed my eyes. "She's now declined to answer further questions," he added. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone making a mistake. This was someone who had assumed I wouldn't find out. Someone who believed authority could replace permission. "Sir," the officer continued, "for transparency, when informed that you were not present and had denied authorization, her demeanor changed significantly." "Changed how?" I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I didn't need the details to understand the implication. "Am I in trouble?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "At this time, you are not suspected of any wrongdoing. We are documenting the incident." Documenting. That word mattered. "Thank you," I said. After the call ended, I sat there until my legs felt heavy, like they'd forgotten how to move. Somewhere, on dark water, my boat was drifting under lights it was never meant to see. Strangers were standing where I had stood, touching what I had built, speaking on my behalf. And the people who were supposed to keep order had just realized something was very wrong. I didn't know yet how far it would go. I didn't know how many lies would unravel or how many doors would open once that first question was asked. All I knew was that a normal night had ended the moment my phone rang. They had asked if I authorized my boat for a nighttime charter. I was 200 miles away, and nothing about my life was going to be calm after that. The drive back felt longer than it should have, like the road was stretching on purpose. I left before sunrise, the sky still dark enough that the headlights cut through empty lanes. Every mile marker reminded me how far away I'd been while someone else stood on my boat and spoke for me. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't turn on the radio. My phone sat in the cup holder, face up, silent, like it was waiting to interrupt me again. By the time the marina came into view, the sun was barely above the horizon. From a distance, everything looked normal. Too normal. Boats gently rocking in their slips, water smooth as glass, gulls circling lazily overhead. For a moment, I wondered if the call had been exaggerated. If maybe it was already over, wrapped up, done. Then I saw the lights. My slip was glowing. Not the soft single dock light I left on when I was away, but multiple lights. Bright, harsh, the kind you turn on when you want people to see where to step. Music drifted across the water, low but unmistakable. A bass line thumping just enough to carry. I parked and got out slowly. The air smelled like salt and spilled alcohol. As I walked down the dock, the details sharpened. Laughter, glass clinking. Someone dropping something and swearing under their breath. These weren't marina workers. This wasn't maintenance. See, this was a party. On my boat. Lucky Escape sat in the water like it always did, white hull catching the morning light, name still painted clean on the side. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. The deck cushions were rearranged. Shoes were piled near the helm. A cooler I didn't own sat open, half full of ice and cans. There were at least a dozen people on board, maybe more. Some sitting, some standing, some leaning against railings like they belonged there. None of them looked like they were worried about being there. I stopped at the edge of the dock and watched for a second, just long enough to take it in. No one noticed me at first. They were too busy laughing, too comfortable. Then someone did notice. A woman near the stern frowned at me, then nudged the man next to her. He turned, followed her gaze, and his expression shifted. Confusion, then annoyance. "Hey," he called out. "Can we help you?" I stepped closer. "Yeah," I said. "You can get off my boat." A ripple moved through the group. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A few people looked genuinely surprised. Others looked irritated, like I'd interrupted something they were entitled to. Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "It's fine," she said. "I'll handle this." She stepped forward, from near the helm, holding a drink like it was an accessory she'd practiced with. Olivia Cartwright, the HOA president. Perfect posture, confident smile, the kind of expression that assumed agreement before words were even exchanged. She looked at me the way people do when they think they outrank you. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "You must be Frederick." I didn't answer right away. Seeing her there, on my boat, was worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't surprised. She was relaxed. "You're on my property," I said. She waved a hand, dismissive. "This is a community gathering. Everything is approved." "Approved by who?" I asked. She smiled wider. "The association." I took another step forward, stopping just short of the gangway. "The association doesn't own this boat." She tilted her head, like I'd said something mildly incorrect but not worth arguing about. "We manage the dock. It's part of the shared waterfront." "That's not true," I said. A few people shifted uncomfortably now. One woman set her drink down. A man near the bow checked his phone, suddenly interested in anything but the conversation. Olivia's smile tightened, just slightly. "Frederick, let's not make this awkward. You're not even supposed to be here today." That landed wrong. "What does that mean?" She glanced at her watch. "You're away, right? That's what you told the board." "I told the board I'd be out of town," I said. "Not that you could use my boat." She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "This is exactly why we didn't want to bother you. The event is almost over." I looked past her at the mess. Empty bottles, scuffed flooring. Someone had spilled. Led something near the cabin door. The wood was dark and sticky. "Everyone off," I said. "Louder now." Olivia's expression hardened. "That's not necessary." "It is," I said, "now." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're overreacting." This was cleared. "You can take it up with the board later." The way she said it, later, like the present moment didn't belong to me at all. I pulled my phone out and started recording. That finally did something. "Why are you filming?" she snapped. "Because you're trespassing," I said. "And I want a record." Her eyes flicked around. People noticed the phone. A few of them started moving toward the exit, suddenly eager to leave. Others hesitated, looking at Olivia like they were waiting for instructions. She straightened her shoulders. "Turn that off." "No." She took a step back, regaining composure. "Frederick, this boat has been used for community purposes before." "Not by me," I said. "You benefited from the association maintaining the dock," she said. "This is part of that arrangement." "There is no arrangement," I said, "and you know it." For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face, just for a moment. Then it vanished, replaced by irritation. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. I laughed, short and humorless. "You're standing on my boat, telling strangers you own it." "I never said I owned it," she replied quickly. "You told the Coast Guard I approved this," I said. That got a reaction. A man near the cabin turned sharply. "The Coast Guard was here?" Olivia shot him a look. "That's not relevant." "It is," I said. "Because they called me. Because they pulled you over. Because they asked if I authorized this." The dock had gone quiet now. No music, no laughter, just the slap of water against the hull. Olivia crossed her arms. "This is being blown out of proportion." "Then put it in writing," I said. "Show me the approval." She didn't answer. "Show me the document," I repeated. She looked at me for a long second, then laughed softly. "You really want to do this in front of everyone?" "I didn't choose the audience," I said. A couple of guests started stepping off the boat without being told. One apologized under his breath as he passed me. Another avoided eye contact completely. Olivia noticed the movement and raised her voice. "Everyone, please remain calm. This is a misunderstanding." "No," I said, "it's not." She leaned in, voice low again. "You're making a mistake." I met her eyes. "So did you." That was when she froze. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a subtle shift. Her confidence stalled like a car engine sputtering. She opened her mouth, closed it, glanced toward the dock entrance like she was calculating how many witnesses were still around. I realized then that she had expected compliance, silence, maybe annoyance but not resistance, certainly not evidence. "You should leave," I said. Now, for a moment it looked like I'd argue again. Then she nodded stiffly. "Everyone," she said, forcing cheer into her voice, "let's wrap this up." People didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes the boat was clearing out, footsteps on the dock, awkward goodbyes, someone muttering about parking. Olivia was the last to leave. She stopped beside me close enough that I could smell the alcohol on her breath. "This isn't over," she said. "It is for today," I replied. She stepped off the boat and walked away without looking back. I stood there alone on the deck after she was gone. The quiet returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with what had just happened. I looked around at the damage, the mess, the signs of a night that should never have happened. And beneath all of it, one thought kept repeating. She hadn't acted like someone who made a mistake. She'd acted like someone who believed she was untouchable. And now she knew she wasn't. The second Coast Guard vehicle rolled into the marina quietly, without sirens, without urgency. And somehow that made it worse. The flashing lights were off, but the presence was unmistakable. Two uniformed officers stepped out with the calm efficiency of people who already knew something was wrong and didn't need to announce it. Conversations on the dock faded almost immediately. I was standing near the helm, phone still in my hand, the last guests just having left. Olivia was a few steps away from me, facing the dock, her posture straight, shoulders squared. From a distance, she still looked composed. Up close, I could see it now. Her jaw was tight, her grip on her phone a little too firm. One of the officers walked toward the boat, boots thudding softly against the dock planks. The other stayed back, scanning the scene, taking in the half-packed coolers, the scattered shoes, the faint smell of alcohol lingering in the air. "Good morning," the first officer said, his voice neutral, professional. "Is everyone safe here?" No one answered right away. That pause stretched longer than it should have. "Yes," Olivia said finally, stepping forward half a step. "Everything's fine." The officer nodded once, eyes moving briefly to the boat's name on the hull, then back to her. "Ma'am, are you the person in charge of this vessel?" She didn't answer immediately. "I represent the Homeowners Association," she said instead. That wasn't what he'd asked. He waited, didn't rush her, didn't interrupt, just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, giving her space to respond properly. "Yes," she said after a beat. "I'm overseeing this event." The officer acknowledged that with a slight nod, then glanced at me. "Sir, are you the registered owner of this boat?" "Yes," I said. The word landed cleanly, without hesitation. The officer took that in, then turned back to Olivia. His tone didn't change. No accusation. No raised voice. "Who gave permission for the vessel to be operated tonight?" That was it. One sentence. Plain. Direct. For a moment nothing happened. Not silence exactly. There were still distant marina sounds, gulls, water against hulls, but the people standing there seemed to stop breathing all at once. Olivia's lips parted slightly. She blinked. Once. Twice. She started. Then she stopped. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to the officer. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. It was subtle, but it was the first time she'd moved without purpose since I'd arrived. "Well," she said slowly, "as I mentioned, the association." "Ma'am," the officer said gently, cutting in without sharpness, "I'm asking about permission from the owner." Her mouth closed. You could almost see the calculation happening behind her eyes, like she was searching for the version of events that would still work. The confident tone she'd used with me earlier was gone now, replaced with something cautious, measured. "He was aware," she said finally. "This wasn't unauthorized." The officer turned his head slightly, looking at me again. "Sir, did you give permission?" "No," I said. No elaboration, no emotion, just no. The officer nodded, then returned his attention to Olivia. "Do you have written authorization?" Another pause. She swallowed. "I don't have it on me," she said. "Is it documented anywhere?" he asked. She exhaled through her nose, a faint sound of frustration. "The association has records." The officer didn't react to that. He simply waited. "I can have someone email it." She added quickly. "Who?" he asked. She hesitated. "Just a fraction too long. Our treasurer." "What's his name?" the officer asked. She said it. The second officer, still standing back, was now writing something down. The first officer nodded again. "We'll wait." That was when the tone shifted completely. Up until then, Olivia had been speaking as if she controlled the situation, as if this was an inconvenience, a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with the right explanation. But now, faced with silence and patience instead of pushback, she started to fidget. She pulled her phone out, thumb hovering over the screen, then stopped, put it back, pulled it out again. The officer didn't fill the silence. He didn't prompt her. He just stood there, watching. "I don't understand why this is such a big deal," she said suddenly, the edge creeping back into her voice. "This was a community event." The officer met her gaze. "Because someone reported that the owner was not present and did not authorize use." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The words didn't come as easily now. Around us, a few marina staff had gathered at a distance, pretending to be busy while clearly listening. Someone leaned against a piling, arms crossed. A couple of people from nearby boats watched openly. Olivia seemed to notice them for the first time. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice tighter. "We're already wrapping up." "That's good," the officer replied. "But I'll need an answer." She looked at him, then at me, then back at the empty deck behind her like it might offer help. "I was told it was approved," she said. "Told by whom?" he asked. Another pause. Her shoulders stiffened. "By the board." The officer nodded slowly. "Do you have documentation from the board authorizing use of a privately owned vessel?" She didn't respond. I watched her carefully then, not with anger, but with a strange detachment. This was the moment where confidence stopped being useful, where authority meant nothing without proof. The officer waited a few more seconds, then spoke again. "Ma'am, without authorization from the owner, this is considered unauthorized use." Her face flushed. "I think you're misunderstanding." "Who gave permission?" he repeated. The same question, same tone, same calm. She froze, completely this time. Her eyes dropped to the deck, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she looked back up, the certainty that had carried her through the night was gone. "I need to make a call," she said. "You're free to do that," the officer replied. "We'll be here." She turned away slightly, phone to her ear, back stiff. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could tell it wasn't going the way she hoped. Her voice was low, urgent. She paced a few steps, then stopped, rubbing her temple with her free hand. The officer didn't move. Neither did I. When she hung up, she didn't turn back right away. She stood there, staring out at the water, shoulders slumped just enough to give her away. She finally faced us again. "There seems to be some confusion." The officer nodded. "That's why we're asking questions." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This will be cleared up." "Possibly," he said. "But until then, we're documenting the incident." That word again. Documenting. Her smile faltered. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means we record who was operating the vessel, under what authority, and whether permission was granted," he said. "It also means we'll include statements from involved parties." She looked at me sharply. "You're really going to do this?" I didn't answer. The officer spoke instead. "Ma'am, I need your full name." She gave it. "Date of birth?" She hesitated, then answered. The second officer wrote steadily, methodically. The dock felt colder suddenly. The morning sun hadn't warmed anything yet, and the breeze off the water cut through the thin confidence she had left. "Sir," the officer said to me, "we may contact you again for follow-up." "I understand," I said. Olivia crossed her arms, defensive now. "This is ridiculous." The officer looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, if you had permission, this would be very simple." She didn't reply. The silence stretched again, heavier than before. This time it wasn't confusion filling it, it was consequence. Finally, the officer closed his notebook. "At this time, the vessel is to remain docked, no furt. Her use is permitted." Olivia's jaw tightened. "Understood?" he asked. She nodded stiffly. "Understood." The officers turned and walked back toward their vehicle, leaving behind a dock that felt very different than it had an hour earlier. As they left, Olivia didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, arms wrapped around herself, like she was bracing against something unseen. The question had been simple. Who gave permission? And in failing to answer it, everything had changed. I didn't say anything after the Coast Guard left. There was nothing left to say in that moment. Olivia stood on the dock for a few seconds longer, staring out at the water like she was waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. No one did. Eventually, she turned and walked away without another word. I stayed. The boat was quiet now, stripped of voices and music, reduced to the small sounds I knew well, the soft creak of lines, the gentle knock of water against the hull. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you're trying not to miss details. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had passed. What I felt instead was focus. I pulled on gloves before touching anything. It wasn't dramatic, it was habit. When you've worked around boats long enough, you learn that documentation matters. What you don't record might as well not exist. I started with my phone. I filmed everything exactly as it was, the scuffed flooring near the cabin entrance, the wine stain soaked into the wood paneling, the cracked edge of the helm screen, the spiderweb fracture spreading from one corner. I zoomed in on the cabinet door that no longer closed properly, the hinge bent just enough to catch. I didn't narrate, I didn't comment. I just captured it. Then I switched to photos, angles, close-ups, wide shots, time-stamped. I made sure the boat's name was visible in several frames, the slip number in others. I photographed the cooler that wasn't mine, the empty bottles, the trash left behind. I didn't throw anything away. When I was done on deck, I went below. The cabin smelled different. Not bad exactly, but unfamiliar. Someone had used the sink without turning off the water completely. There was dampness around the base. The bathroom door had a new scratch on the inside, shallow but noticeable. I photographed that too. Only after I'd finished did I start cleaning up enough to move safely. I sat at the small table inside the cabin and opened my laptop. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected adrenaline, shaking, something dramatic. But there was none of that. Just a quiet sense that this needed to be done correctly. I logged into my security system. The cameras had been installed months earlier, partly for peace of mind, partly because the marina had experienced a few thefts. I hadn't expected them to matter like this. I scrolled back through the timeline. There it was. The first clip showed the dock late the previous evening. The lighting was dim but clear. Enough. Figures approached. Keys jingled. Someone leaned down near the gate. The lock disengaged. I watched as Olivia stepped into frame. No hesitation, no confusion. She moved like someone who had done this before, or at least believed she had every right to. She gestured to others behind her, spoke briefly, then walked straight onto the boat. I didn't stop the video. I watched the next clip, and the next. People carrying bags, boxes, a cooler. Someone unplugging one of the cameras, then realizing it wasn't the right one. Someone else reaching up and adjusting a fixture. The sound wasn't recorded, but I didn't need it. The body language said enough. I bookmarked the timestamps. I saved copies, 2 separate drives, cloud backup. When I was done with the footage, I logged into the marina's online portal. I'd never paid much attention to it beyond billing and slip assignment, but now I navigated to the access logs. The gate entry records were there. Date, time, key fob ID. I exported them. There was no spike in maintenance access, No emergency override, just a sequence of authorized entries linked to association-issued credentials, not mine. I didn't draw conclusions. I didn't write notes about intent or motive. I just saved the data. Next, I opened the folder I kept for ownership documents. Deed, title, registration, insurance, dock easement agreement. Everything was there, exactly where it always was, scanned, labeled, dated. I'd learned a long time ago that ging from memory was useless. Paper didn't forget. I printed copies. As I worked, my phone buzzed a few times. Missed calls, messages. I ignored them. None of this required immediate response. Rushing would only create mistakes. By mid-morning I had a folder, physical and digital. Nothing fancy, no commentary, just records. I left the boat locked, cameras back online, and drove straight to the marina office. The manager looked up when I walked in, surprised. "I heard there was some kind of issue earlier," he said cautiously. "I'm here to document it," I replied. I didn't accuse. I didn't complain. I asked for logs. He hesitated at first, then nodded. We sat side by side at his desk as he pulled up the system. Dock access, power usage, overnight activity. Everything matched what I already had. "I'll need copies," I said. He printed them without argument. When I stood to leave, he cleared his throat. "If this turns into something official—" "It already is," I said calmly. Next stop was the county records office. I didn't announce myself. I waited my turn. When my number was called, I explained what I needed in a neutral tone. Confirmation of private ownership, dock boundaries, no special permissions granted to third parties. The clerk pulled the file. "It's clearly yours," she said, almost apologetically, like she expected a dispute. "I know," I said. "I just need confirmation." She stamped the papers and slid them across the counter. By the time I got back, to my car, the sun was high. The marina busy again. People laughed. Engines started. Life continued like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Olivia Short. Controlled. "We need to talk," she said. "There's been a misunderstanding." I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the police station. At the front desk, I asked how to file a report regarding unauthorized use of property. The officer behind the counter nodded and handed me a clipboard. I filled it out carefully. No adjectives, no speculation, just facts, time, location, description. When I was called back, a detective met me in a small interview room. She asked questions. I answered them. When she asked if I had evidence, I slid the folder across the table. She went quiet as she flipped through it. "These are time-stamped?" she asked. "Yes." "And the footage shows entry without your presence?" "Yes." "She claimed permission?" the detective asked. "Yes." The detective leaned back slightly, studying me. "You're very calm about this." "There's no benefit to being anything else," I said. She nodded once. "We'll need copies of everything." I handed them over. When I left the station, I felt lighter, not because it was over, but because it was now documented somewhere that wasn't just mine. The story no longer lived only in my words. Later that afternoon, my attorney called. I forwarded everything without commentary. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need them. "This is thorough," she said. "You didn't engage with her?" "No." "Good," she replied. "That matters." By evening, messages were circulating in the neighborhood group chat. Confusion, speculation. Some people asking what had happened, others defending the association. I didn't respond to any of it. Silence, I was learning, was its own form of leverage. 2 days later, an investigator called. He had specific questions, names, times, access methods. I answered them all. At no point did anyone ask me to raise my voice. At no point did anyone suggest confrontation. Every step moved forward because the information was clean, organized, and indisputable. That was the thing Olivia hadn't accounted for. She'd relied on authority, on tone, on confidence. I'd relied on preparation. Cameras didn't argue, logs didn't forget, records didn't bend under pressure. And by choosing not to escalate, not to accuse, not to dramatize, I'd given everyone else room to see the situation clearly. No threats, no shouting, no spectacle, just receipts. And once those were on the table, the balance shifted quietly, permanently, in a way no display of power ever could. The first crack appeared quietly. It wasn't a confrontation or an announcement. It was a forwarded email that landed in my inbox late one evening, sent by a neighbor I barely spoke to beyond polite waves. No commentary, no explanation. Just the subject line and a single sentence at the top. I thought you should say, this. The email itself was from the HOA, sent the morning after the marina incident. It framed the situation as a minor scheduling issue, a temporary misunderstanding regarding shared waterfront resources. No mention of my name, no mention of my boat, no mention of the Coast Guard. I read it twice. The language was careful, almost elegant in how it avoided specifics. That alone told me something was wrong. If everything had truly been approved, there would be no need for vagueness. I didn't respond. Instead, I waited. Within hours, messages began circulating in the neighborhood group chat. Someone asked why there had been flashing lights at the marina the night before. Another asked why the HOA event had ended so abruptly. A third wondered aloud why the boat used for the gathering was suddenly off-limits. That phrasing caught my attention. Off-limits implied it had ever been on limits to begin with. I watched the conversation unfold without participating. People speculated freely when they thought the person involved wasn't reading. Some defended the board reflexively, others sounded unsure. Then someone posted, "I thought the boat belonged to the association." That was the first contradiction spoken out loud. Another neighbor replied, "No, I'm pretty sure it's privately owned." A third chimed in, "I was told it was donated for community use." That was new. Donated. I saved screenshots. Over the next 2 days, the story shifted again and again. Dependi. NG. On who was telling it. In one version, the boat had been temporarily allocated for HOA functions. In another, it was part of a shared dock agreement. In a third, it was supposedly offered up voluntarily, then withdrawn without warning. Each version contradicted the last. What they all had in common was this: none of them matched reality. I still didn't correct anyone. The next revelation came in person. I was walking my dog when Linda, a neighbor from 3 houses down, slowed her pace to match mine. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd rehearsed the conversation but wasn't sure how to start. "I heard what happened," she said finally. I nodded. "There's been a lot of talk." She hesitated. "I was at a board meeting last month." I stopped walking. "Go on." "They mentioned your boat," she said quietly. "Not by name, but it was obvious." "What did they say?" I asked. "That it was a community asset being underutilized," she replied. "They joked about how you were never around to enjoy it." I didn't react. "They said they'd handle the permissions," she added. "I assumed they meant asking you, did they mention any written approval?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. They made it sound like it was already settled." That was important, not because it was shocking, but because it established pattern. The assumption of consent, the rewriting of ownership through repetition. Linda exhaled. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after seeing the Coast G, You did the right thing telling me," I said. She nodded, relieved, and walked on. That night another email circulated. This one from Olivia herself. She assured residents that the situation was being resolved internally and that no wrongdoing had occurred. She emphasized unity, cooperation, moving forward. Still no documents, no explanation of authority, no acknowledgement of error. The contradictions were stacking up. 2 days later, a different neighbor knocked on my door. "I don't want to get involved," he said immediately, as if saying it first would protect him. "But I feel like I should tell you something." I invited him in. He explained that he'd been approached weeks earlier about volunteering for event setup at the marina. When he asked which facilities would be used, he was told, "The boat near Slip 14. "It's cleared." "Cleared by who?" I asked. "That's what I asked," he said. "They said not to worry about it." I wrote it down. Another neighbor emailed me screenshots of a private HOA message thread. In it, someone had asked whether they needed to sign a waiver for being on the boat. The response from a board member read, "No, it's covered." The owner approved. That sentence appeared nowhere else. No email, no form, no signature, just words. I noticed something else, too. Every explanation relied on someone else. The board, the association, a verbal okay, a vague understanding. Responsibility was always just out of reach. By the end of the week, the HOA story had splintered into too many versions to track. Some residents believed the boat was partially owned by the association. Others thought it was leased. A few believed it had been seized temporarily due to dock maintenance. One person insisted it was insurance-related. None of those claims matched any document. That's when the official request started. The HOA asked me formally to provide proof of ownership. I smiled when I read that. I forwarded the request to my attorney, who replied with copies of the deed, title, registration, and dock agreement. She attached a brief note, stating that these documents had already been made available to law enforcement. The HOA did not respond. Instead, they sent out another community message, this time shorter, saying that certain planned events would be postponed. Questions flooded the group chat. Why postponed? Until when? Because of what? No answers came. That silence did more damage than any accusation could have. Neighbors started comparing notes. One realized HOA dues had increased the same month as a supposed waterfront improvement project that never happened. Another mentioned that invoices for marina-related expenses had been unusually vague. Someone else recalled being told that funds were allocated for shared equipment. Equipment that no one could name. I watched it unfold like dominoes tipping one at a time. Then came the meeting. An emergency HOA meeting was called, framed as a clarification session. Attendance was higher than I'd ever seen. People didn't come to hear reassurances anymore. They came with questions. I didn't speak at first. I didn't need to. Residents asked where the written approval was, why the boat was described differently to different people, why law enforcement had been involved if everything was authorized. Olivia answered calmly at first, repeating familiar phrases. Community resource, miscommunication, overblown reaction. Then someone asked, "Can you show us the permission?" She said it was being compiled. Another resident asked, "Why did you tell us it was donated?" She denied using that word. Someone pulled up a message where she had, "The room shifted." A board member tried to step in, claiming the dock agreement gave them rights. A neighbor read the agreement aloud. It didn't. Each question exposed a new inconsistency. Each answer created two more. By the end of the meeting, the narrative they'd relied on no longer held together. It wasn't replaced with a new story. It simply collapsed. People didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They sat in silence, processing the realization that they'd been told different things depending on convenience. Afterward, neighbors lingered in the parking lot, talking quietly, sharing what they'd heard, what they'd been promised, what they'd assumed. I received 3 more messages that night, each beginning the same way. I didn't think this mattered before, but those were the most dangerous words for any false story. Because once people start revisiting assumptions, the truth doesn't need to be forced. It surfaces on its own. By the time the weekend arrived, the HOA's explanations were no longer trusted. Not because of what I said, but because of what they couldn't prove. Permissions that didn't exist. Assets that weren't theirs. Approvals that vanished when asked for. Their authority had depended on silence and confusion. Both were gone. And as more neighbors stepped forward, comparing what they'd been told behind closed doors, it became clear this wasn't just about a boat. It was about a pattern, one that could no longer survive daylight. Once the questions started multiplying, the shift was noticeable. Not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable. The situation stopped being something handled through emails and neighborhood meetings and became something formal, structured, procedural, the kind of process that doesn't move quickly but doesn't stop once it starts. The first official contact came from a county investigator. He introduced himself calmly, explained his role, and outlined what the next steps would look like. There was no judgment in his voice, no assumption of guilt or innocence, just a list of tasks that needed to be completed. He asked for a timeline. I provided one. He asked for copies of documentation. I sent them. He asked whether I was willing to give a recorded statement. I agreed. The interview took place in a small, plain room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recorder placed between us. He asked questions in order: dates, times, locations, who said what and when. When I didn't know something for certain, I said so. When I could verify it, I did. There was no benefit in exaggeration. Accuracy mattered more than emotion. He didn't react when I mentioned the HOA president by name. He didn't interrupt when I described the marina incident. He simply listened, occasionally asking for clarification, occasionally writing something down. When we were done, he thanked me and explained that the investigation would continue independently. I wouldn't be updated on every step. Some things might take time. I understood. Over the next week, I was contacted by 2 additional agencies. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: professional introductions, clear explanations of jurisdiction, requests for specific materials. One investigator asked about surveillance footage. I shared the files. Another asked about marina access logs. I forwarded them. A third asked for ownership verification. I sent certified copies. No one asked me what outcome I wanted. No one promised consequences. That was oddly reassuring. The process didn't revolve around me anymore. It revolved around facts. At the same time, other residents began receiving requests of their own. Some were asked to confirm emails they'd received. Others were asked about statements made during HOA meetings. A few were asked to provide copies of messages they'd saved but never thought would matter. People compared notes quietly, not in group chats or public forums, but in private conversations. The tone had changed. There was less speculation, more caution, less defensiveness, more reflection. The HOA board issued a short notice stating that they were cooperating fully with all inquiries. The language was neutral, careful. Gone was the confident reassurance from before. Then came the financial review. That was when things slowed down but also deepened. An auditor contacted me, not because I was responsible for HOA finances, but because my boat had been cited in budget discussions. She wanted to know whether I'd ever been paid, reimbursed, or credited for its use. I hadn't. She asked whether I'd signed any agreements allowing the association to use private property for events. I hadn't. She thanked me and moved on. Later, I learned that bank records had been requested. Expense reports, invoices, grant applications, the kind of paperwork that looks harmless until it's examined closely. No one shared details with me. They didn't need to. The fact that these steps were happening at all said enough. The HOA cancelled all remaining events for the season. Another notice followed, this one informing residents that a temporary management firm would be assisting with administrative oversight. That phrase appeared twice in the email, as if repeating it might make it clearer. People didn't argue anymore. They read. They waited. I was asked to give a second statement, this time to clarify a few timeline points. The investigator was polite, methodical. He asked the same questions in a slightly different order, not to trip me up, but to confirm consistency. At the end, he said something that stuck with me. "We don't need anger to prove misuse," he said. "We need patterns." That summed it up. No one was interested in dramatic confrontations or emotional testimony. What mattered was repetition, consistency, whether actions aligned with authority. Meanwhile, Olivia stopped appearing in public spaces. Her emails ceased. Another board member took over communication, brief and impersonal. When residents asked what would happen next, the answer was always the same. "We're following the process." That phrase frustrated some people. Others found comfort in it. I understood both reactions. Processes don't offer immediate closure. They don't satisfy curiosity, but they do prevent chaos. Weeks passed. I returned to my routine. Work, home, the boat once repairs were completed. Life didn't pause just because accountability was underway. Occasionally, an investigator would call with a follow-up question. Occasionally, my attorney would forward an update that was more procedural than substantive. Requests for filled, deadlines extended, reviews ongoing. There were no dramatic arrests, no public statements, no spectacle, just progress. One afternoon, I received a formal notice stating that the HOA's authority over certain assets was suspended pending review. It didn't mention my boat specifically. It didn't need to. Another notice followed, informing residents that elections would be postponed. Then another announcing that an external firm would conduct a full financial audit. Each step was small on its own. Together they formed a direction. At no point did I feel triumphant. That surprised me. I'd imagined that if accountability came, it would feel satisfying, vindicating. Instead, it felt sober. This wasn't about winning. It was about restoring something that had been misused. A few neighbors reached out privately, thanking me for staying calm. I told them the truth. I didn't do anything special, I said. I just didn't interfere with the process. That seemed to resonate. Eventually, formal findings were issued, not publicly announced, but shared with those directly involved. They outlined discrepancies, unsupported claims, actions taken without authority. They didn't assign motives. They didn't dramatize. They simply documented. Consequences followed in the same measured way. Certain board members were removed. Others resigned. Accounts were frozen temporarily while reviews concluded. Policies were rewritten. Oversight increased. It wasn't punishment for T's sake of punishment. It was correction. Through it all, I stayed out of the spotlight. I wasn't asked to speak at meetings or explain myself to the community. The facts spoke clearly enough. Looking back, that was the most important part. There was no revenge, no public shaming, no escalation. Just a system doing what it's designed to do when given accurate information and the space to operate. The justice didn't arrive loudly. It arrived steadily, and that made it last. The final resolution didn't happen with fireworks, as I had once imagined it might. There were no dramatic arrests, no celebratory banners, no headlines splashed across the neighborhood newsletter. Instead, it unfolded quietly, gradually, with the weight of authority and procedure doing what spectacle never could. By the time the dust settled, the HOA had lost the very powers they had relied on to justify their actions, not through revenge or confrontation, but through methodical, persistent accountability. The boat, my boat, Lucky Escape, was returned intact, minus the minor damage and stains, which were addressed later through documented repair and restitution. The morning it finally returned to my slip, I arrived at the marina earlier than usual. The dock was empty, save for a few workers adjusting lines and checking bilge pumps. I could see the boat floating there, gleaming in the soft dawn light. It looked ordinary again, just a boat, but the significance of the moment was far from ordinary. My hands hovered over the rail for a moment, and I simply breathed, letting the relief settle in without needing to say a word to anyone. There was no need to celebrate. The quiet of the harbor, the gentle lapping of water against the hull, and the absence of tension were enough. As I walked down the dock, I thought about how this all began. A midnight call from the Coast Guard, a party I had never authorized, a series of assumptions and misstatements that had spiraled out of control. And now, finally, a resolution that didn't rely on theatrics or spectacle, only documentation, consistency, and adherence to procedure. The system had worked, not quickly, not without effort, but it had worked. I ran my hands along the boat's rails, noting the scuff marks and scratches that would need attention. Each one reminded me of the night it had been misused, of the strangers who had wandered freely over a vessel that wasn't theirs. But there was also a sense of reclamation in the motion. Each repair, each small adjustment, was a quiet act of restoration. I wasn't retaliating. I wasn't punishing. I was simply restoring the boundaries that had been violated and reasserting ownership in a way that respected process and legality. Over the following days, neighborhood conversations shifted. The HOA had issued formal communications explaining their reduced authority, the suspension of certain privileges, and the appointment of external oversight for remaining operations. Some residents were relieved. Others seemed conflicted, unsure how to reconcile past loyalties with present realities. I didn't try to influence their perceptions. I simply observed, noting the subtle ways in which trust and awareness were beginning to rebuild. One afternoon, a few neighbors approached me near the dock. We spoke quietly, exchanging stories of what they had noticed over the previous weeks, the things they hadn't spoken about before, and the ways in which the HOA's narrative had failed to hold together under scrutiny. There was no anger, no gloating, just shared acknowledgement of what had been true all along. Those conversations, understated as they were, felt more powerful than any formal statement or public rebuke. Community understanding had shifted quietly but irreversibly. I began the process of repairing the boat, documenting each step carefully. New cushions, cleaned upholstery, replaced cabinet hardware. Even minor repairs were meticulously recorded. Photographs and receipts organized alongside the legal documents, surveillance footage and marina logs I had already compiled. There was a certain satisfaction in the orderliness of it. The chaos of the past weeks was being replaced with careful, deliberate structure. Each photo, each receipt, each line of documentation was a silent assertion. Boundaries matter, property matters, accountability matters. As repairs progressed, I also took time to reflect on the broader lessons. The situation could easily have escalated into confrontation, into anger or retaliation. That had been tempting at first, and there were moments when I felt the rush of indignation surge within me, but the restraint had been critical. Not reacting emotionally, not lashing out, allowed the facts to stand on their own. The truth didn't need embellishment, it didn't need dramatization, it simply needed to be presented clearly, consistently, and without interference. Power, I realized, only functions when unchecked. Without accountability, assumptions become authority, confidence becomes coercion, and words replace facts. The HOA had relied on that dynamic, believing that verbal claims, habitual silence, and perceived status would shield them from consequence. They hadn't counted on methodical documentation, community observation, and a willingness to let procedures do the work. That understanding was perhaps the most important takeaway, not just for me, but for anyone watching, anyone who might ever encounter unchecked authority in their own life. The calm resolution also created space for reflection among my neighbors. Some had been skeptical at first, reluctant to question board decisions or challenge established patterns. Others had been entirely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. As conversations continued, people began sharing their own experiences, small anecdotes that, when pieced together, highlighted broader patterns of oversight, assumptions, and authority misuse. The shift wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic. But over time, a culture of awareness and accountability emerged. Residents started asking for clearer documentation, for transparency in decisions, and for policies that respected property rights and personal consent. I organized a small gathering to celebrate the return of the boat, not as a triumph over anyone, not as revenge, but as a quiet acknowledgement that boundaries had been restored and that the neighborhood could begin rebuilding trust. It was a modest event, with close neighbors, some coffee, pastries, and casual conversation. We talked about boating, about the community, about lessons learned without delving into specifics that would inflame tensions. The emphasis was on calm restoration, on acknowledging what had been disrupted and what had been repaired. During that gathering, I shared a thought I had been reflecting on for weeks. Power only works if no one checks it. I said quietly, not in accusation but as an observation. Heads nodded, some murmured agreement, others paused, thinking. The statement hung in the air, simple and unadorned, yet profound. It encapsulated the entire ordeal more accurately than any dramatic retelling could. Power without accountability is fragile. Unchecked authority can feel invincible until confronted with persistence, clarity, and patience. Later, as the day ended and neighbors dispersed, I walked down to the water, the boat swaying gently in its slip. The repairs were complete. The dock was quiet. The sun cast long, golden reflections across the surface. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of normalcy return. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but clarity. The system, the rules, and the procedures had worked as intended. Mistakes had been corrected. Boundaries had been respected. Justice, measured and steady, had done its work. Even in that calm, I found myself thinking beyond the immediate situation. I still wonder how often this kind of misuse happens. In neighborhoods, in workplaces, in institutions where authority goes unchecked. How many people accept assumptions as fact? How many allow confidence to substitute for proof? How often does silence enable control? That reflection isn't meant to assign blame for my situation. It's meant to invite awareness, to remind myself and anyone observing that vigilance, clarity, and the willingness to document and question are essential to preserving fairness. I returned inside, organized the last documents, and prepared them for secure storage. Every receipt, every log, every photograph was catalogued carefully. There was no need for dramatization. There was no desire for retribution. The work itself was sufficient, and the knowledge that the facts were preserved offered a sense of enduring closure. As the evening settled, I recorded a short note to myself, reflecting on the experience. The calm, methodical approach had yielded results. No one had been humiliated publicly. No confrontation had escalated. The community, though shaken, had been given a model for accountability without chaos. Boundaries had been restored, not through force, but through adherence to truth and process. That became the lens through which I would share this story. Not to vilify, not to sensationalize, but to highlight the importance of vigilance, preparation, and restraint. To show that even in the face of misused authority, measured action, documentation, communication, and letting systems operate can restore balance and protect what is rightfully yours. The boat was mine again, fully restored, and with it came the understanding that boundaries are only meaningful when enforced with clarity and calm. The HOA's influence had waned, but the lessons remained, not just for me, but for anyone watching, anyone who might one day face similar situations. Observing, documenting, and trusting in established procedures had created change without hostility, without spectacle, without vengeance. Finally, I looked toward the camera in my storytelling setup and considered what to say to those watching. I still wonder how often this happens, I spoke softly. How often do people assume authority over something that isn't theirs? How often does silence allow power to operate unchecked? The answer might surprise you. The quiet reflection was intentional. The story didn't need dramatics. The lesson didn't need anger. And the engagement, the reason people would comment, discuss, and share, wasn't in sensationalism. It was in reflection. People respond to clarity, to the idea that there is a structure, a way forward, that accountability can exist without conflict, that calm persistence can succeed where drama fails. That was the final scene. A neighborhood adjusting, a boat returned, procedures followed, trust beginning to rebuild, and a simple truth lingering in the air. Power only works if no one checks it. And with that, the story closed. Not with vengeance, not with spectacle, but with reflection, awareness, and the quiet, enduring strength of right procedure executed patiently and thoroughly.